All right. So, welcome to New Moon Manifestation. Um, I think that both of you have your own practice with manifestation and intention writing. Um, so, if you feel like sharing your own practices, I'd love to hear kind of what you do and your own style of what you do. You could type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Hmm. I think for me, it's as simple as lighting a candle, sitting down and writing it, and making some lists of first things to let go of or burn away, and then second, seeds to plant.
I like the ritual of burning away what you're letting go.
Mm-hmm.
I like that too. Sometimes I'll also use putting it in water just as another modality. And then after I let it like soak in water, then I'll go do something else with it too. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's another form of transmutation.
Yeah. So I think the last time I put it in water and then I went and I buried it somewhere. So I thought it's like watering the seed of it and then you're like planting it. Yeah.
Cool. So you're watering it before you plant it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I also try to light some candles or have a little bit of an altar space. And I tend to do it every new moon. The there's no rules to it, but generally we set intentions during the new moon. It's a quieter time, usually just a little less energy in the air, and then full moon is when we kind of like dance it out and we do the partying, right? um, so there's a few points I want to talk about with manifestation. I think specifically because we do, write down what we intend to do, but a lot of times um, we get what we want, but we don't necessarily get what we want once we get it, right? I know I've had the experience of manifesting something and then realizing, oh, this is totally not what I wanted. And a really good example was my whole last year was really difficult. It was a result of me trying to really change who I was, um, from like very disciplined and very like just action oriented to this complete 360 surrender of, okay, now I'm just going to do restorative yoga only. And now I'm going to step into a relationship that I wasn't even ready for because I wanted to do something that I wasn't used to doing. So I kind of went opposite totally of everything, just because I thought I needed to. So I think the first thing is to really notice your resistances, and notice some of the patterns in your life. So there's a lot of introspection that happens there in terms of where were those points in your life where you felt like you had to go the opposite direction of what you think didn't work. So I would just kind of go through and take the time to notice what actions or what was your reaction when something didn't work in your life. Did you go the opposite direction and say, oh, so I close my heart too much, so I'm just going to open it entirely to everyone, as an example. For me, is I close my heart too much, so I'm really going to feel everything intensely and not listen to my logic at all, for example. So then what happens is we kind of ping pong from one polarity to the other, back and forth. And we think we're fixing things, but we're not actually thinking beyond our reaction, right? So the first step is to examine and notice when you're being in reactivity. And so how do we get out of that reactivity? We focus on what we want to feel instead of what didn't work, right? So a lot of times when we focus on this didn't work, so I'm going to try something else. Well, what we want to feel might incorporate the things that we thought didn't work, right? So in that way, we kind of get out of the all or nothing attitude. We can start taking pieces of what did work, right? So this is where the embodiment comes in. A lot of times we get in our minds about what we want, but we don't take the time to feel in our bodies how we want to feel. And a big thing with why intention setting, why manifestation works, as I've definitely preached before, is we have to have a visceral feeling of what we want. And what happens is when we can tune into, for example, the feeling of secure attachment, and we can really learn to trust that feeling in our bodies, then we can begin noticing, like, this activity or this person that I'm around invokes the feeling I want to feel with secure attachment. So we learn to, one, develop the body mastery and the emotional mastery to understand what it feels. And then two, when it does happen, we can trust that wisdom and start kind of trusting our bodies again, especially when we get into our scarcity mindset or our survival instincts. When we're in trauma, we really want to continue feeling that cycle of trauma, almost that becomes a feeling of safety. So when we can focus our bodies to train ourselves to feel what safety is, then we can start retraining our mind and redesigning it to understand what this new feeling of safety means. So that doesn't mean that we push away everything else and we're just like, this is safety, right? There is definitely a feeling of the polarities, which we tend to bounce back and forth from. They're really helpful for us to find where the edges are. They're really helpful for us to understand the boundaries of, like, this is not how I want to feel, or this is the furthest I can go. So then we feel where the integration is as well. Where do these two polarities meet, right? So when we feel that integration, so a big one for me is surrender and control, right? And there's nothing wrong, right, with either of those things. There's a feeling of I need to surrender sometimes and I need to control sometimes. So what's that feeling in the integration? And for me, it's invitation. It's a feeling of magnetizing, right? I'm taking the steps to work on who I want to be, to my non-negotiable daily actions, yet I can surrender to who is willing to come and receive what I have to say or who I am. So there's always a place where everything meets, no matter what the polarity is. So a wonderful exercise to kind of start understanding those resistances is to write down some of the words that come up in terms of the polarities that kind of pull you back and forth in your past. So the idea of shadow work a lot of times is just looking through your past and things that we go through in our past that we haven't processed. So we have to look in our past for information. And when we look at our past instances, we can extrapolate information. Like, these are the times I resisted here. These are where I was pulled back and forth. And take that time to feel into what those emotions are. And then feel into where those two polarities meet. And you can utilize your body first as a way to meditate on where those two words meet. And then you can write down any notes, right? And that's when we can start clearing our past behavior as a way to continue in the same cycles. This is where we can start breaking those cycles by understanding what you want without being reactive. So after that, after you've very clearly defined some resistances, this is where also it's really helpful to have a person there holding space for you, especially if you feel like this is really tough work, which it is, right? And the reason why it's really good if you can find someone you trust to work with on this is because the other person doesn't have the same resistance. They don't have skin on the game, right? So they can very easily, as a third party, say, I'm sensing that there's something there, that you're being kind of reactive on this. Why? What's that about? Especially if that person is really good at not like imposing advice or trying to steer you one way or the other and just asking questions. That would be really helpful as well to help you with finding those points. So after you've really delved into your past, you can start thinking about your future. So this is where the intention setting comes in. So it's the present and the future, actually. So I work through the chakra system just because it's really good. It's a really good comprehensive guide on all our needs, right, in every aspect. So it's not necessary that you use the chakra system. You can definitely use anything you want. You can develop your own. You can look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, whatever it may be. So I'm going to go through the chakra system so that you understand what it is exactly that I work through. So the first chakra is the home and the body. So as you go through this, I really encourage you to In the beginning, it might be like a lot more lengthy, but I want you to really focus on how you do want to feel, right? So this is where you start breaking the cycle. So maybe in that first part, when we were talking about like burning certain things we want to let go of, or like planting the seeds, this is more the first iteration of the resistances. And so now we're really focusing on, okay, going forward, how do I want to feel? So that might be very specific, like if I had a really spacious place, right? Like I have a spacious place in which I can dance and do yoga and play music and express myself, right? So we can't just go and say, like, I want $1 million home and then not explain the feeling behind it, right? So then when you like notice an opportunity, you're really going to be able to jump on that because now you're alert to it. You've alerted your mind. It's really also helpful to visualize, right? So visualizing in your head what that home looks like, what your body might feel like if you notice this home that you want, right? So you're visualizing, you're noticing how you feel, and then we start really believing that we can have it because you're teaching your body, okay, this is possible. And your body doesn't know the difference whether you have it now or not. So once you train that, then you start really believing when it happens that you can jump on that opportunity. So one of the stories, I was like talking about my hookah and how I got this hookah. So just a few days ago, I was having a conversation and we were talking about how, it'd be really nice to have a hookah. I kind of forgot about how awesome smoking hookah is. And I was thinking, oh my God, it would look so beautiful in my home. It totally matches the decor. So then I just thought to myself, yeah, I'm totally going to get one. Not even going to question whether it's going to happen. It will. So then I noticed on a Facebook page that someone was getting rid of all his stuff in his house. So I headed over there to see, what was going to be there. And so I'm just walking around. The place is a huge mess. It's so many things scattered about in the garage. So I'm looking around and I see this tiny hose. And I notice that it's a hose for a hookah. And so I looked at it. I don't see the hookah anywhere. So I asked one of the guys, I said, is there a hookah here? And they said, yeah, there is. Let me find the hookah for you and like all the accessories that come with it, So it's this like gorgeous hookah with all the attachments, like way more than I even need. And 2 days later, I get a hookah. So I share this story because this is the exact process of how it works. One, you express your desire for something. So you have to know what you want, right? So you express your desire and then you believe that it will happen, right? So then you're training your mind to notice when there's an opportunity. So I noticed the hookah hose, even though it didn't even attach to the actual hookah. I noticed the smaller hose and I asked about it instead of thinking, oh, there's no hookah, I just see the hose. I asked about it because I saw there was an opportunity and I asked for what I needed. And then it came to me, right? So this is a really good real life example of how that process works. Okay, so going back to the chakras, one, the home and the body. And then after this, I'm going to share some examples of what I write down. So the second chakra is your desires. And you can also put your sexual needs here. So that's any and all desires. You can really go crazy here. And then your third chakra is your will, your legacy, and your identity. Right? So this is, a good practice. A lot of times we talk about if you were to write your obituary, what would it look like? Right? So we kind of go backwards there, or I don't know, future there. And we kind of tune into, well, what do we want to be known as? And this is how you really start channeling, like who do you desire to be? How do you want to show up in this world? And then the second chakra or the fifth. Nope, the fourth. So the fourth is your heart, and that's your unconditional love. So I feel called to kind of talk about the difference between the second and the fourth. So the second is, it can include romantic love, sex, desires. And the fourth can also include that. But this is more of this open-hearted and conditional compassion, empathy. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And then the fifth is your throat. So your listening, your communication, and your expressions or your creativity. How do you want to put out your expression? And then your sixth is your intuition. So when we get higher up, from what I've learned in myself and what I've been taught, is as we get higher up, there's a little less and less material. Because when we talk about intuition, we're probably just saying something along the lines of, I'm walking the path of least resistance, and I always know what the path of least resistance is. Something like that, right? And you really just allow the intuition to speak for itself. And then the seventh is the crown, and that's channeling source. Again, that's pretty explanatory. I tend to write something very similar in terms of I open myself as a channel to receiving from source, from divinity, from God, whatever you believe in, right? So for some people, they're very much like, I need the external, I need the physical. I worked with my sister on this, and she's very much like, I just need to work on the first three. And for some people, it's like that. So don't feel like you have to go through all of it if you feel overwhelmed. It might just be, I work on 3 of these and I'll be feeling really good, and then go from there, right? So again, don't have that all or nothing attitude. I can't go through all of this. This is too much, and then I don't do anything, right? So it might just be one chakra this month if it's too much. And so once you go through all of that, I think this part is the most important. It's to embody it, right? So as you do this month by month, especially if you already have a practice on this, then you're really gonna, it really comes to several affirmations, right? And it sometimes just depends on what you're doing that month. That's like that you're really tuned into, right? And so just find a few of them, or you can do all of them, and put it as an affirmation of how you feel it in the present moment, and then you embody it. So you can put on a playlist, or you can do it in silence. I think it's easier with music. And so I act it out. I act out what it feels like to feel secure attachment. It's like a super important one for me, right? So then I'm cueing to my body, like, this is what it feels like to feel secure attachment. And so when I'm in those points of feeling unsafe, when I feel triggered, then I can give myself a body cue. Like, a lot of people do tapping to kind of really like put themselves back to their body. So you're giving yourself these cues, and keep it really simple. A lot of times it's easier to just do one movement and then repeat it over and over. Just a short repetitive thing that says, I feel secure attachment. I feel secure attachment. How does that feel in my body? How do I act that out? So then, one, you can start feeling what that feels like. And two, when there are times where you feel triggered, you can begin learning how to self-soothe yourself and come back to this point of, okay, where do I want to be? Where do I want to be? Right? And it doesn't happen right away. It's okay to feel those emotions where you do feel triggered and you feel your sadness. The point isn't to dwell in it. That's the difference here. Is you can feel it. Let's not dwell in it. Can we learn to transmute that at any time? And that's resilience, right? And that's when we start stepping into these different modes of interacting with the world, where you truly believe that you deserve all of it. You truly believe that you deserve all the good things to happen to you. And you start noticing too that there are other people that practice it, and you want to be around those people that also practice that. And then that really amplifies with a whole community of people that start believing in themselves and believing in each other and providing those things and asking for those things. So that's why it's so important that we do these things and to spread that. So if you have your own practice, you want to hold space for other people, I really invite you to start doing that. So then we can really change that paradigm. Okay, so just to go over your resistances. Feel into your body, find the integrations, go through the chakra system or any kind of system and write down how you want to feel. Maybe start boiling it down, especially after a few months of practice, into several affirmations and embody it. Put on your favorite playlist. I can provide a playlist and act it out. You can act out the polarities too, or you can just act out how you want to feel. So then you can either just stop there and just allow yourself to get there, and just trust that you are already doing this good work of recoding your mindset. Or you can take it further and really think about, what are the actionable steps for me to feel secure attachment, for me to feel vitality in my body. Oh, I need to change the way I eat, or I need to start expressing my needs, or I need to understand what it means for someone to be a secure person, for me to even notice that. So you can take it more to the physical after that and really focus on, this is what I actually need to do. And then you will see the opportunities that arise. So your control in this instance is the work you're doing every month or so, or more, to write down how you need to feel. And the surrender is, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'll be ready when it happens. I'll be able to detect it when it happens. And that's invitation. So, are there any questions or feedback, reflections? Okay, so I really encourage you to come up with your own affirmations when you do this. But I also do want to give you some ideas on what I work with personally in my intention setting. So I'll just read a few from every category. So 1, home and body. I am safe in my body. I feel energy moving through. I feel vitality in my body. My home is inviting, a safe space for creative expression, healing, and a reset for the nervous system. So 2, second, sacral, desires. I birth creative energy into the physical realm. I witness and facilitate others' rest and dance. I allow myself to feel and have the resilience to move through it. The third, the will and the legacy. I am an empowering leader with integrity. I have compassion, empathy, and vulnerability. I magnetize dream clients that want to work with me. I spread joy. Unconditional love, heart. I am open to receiving and giving love. I love myself. I know what's best for me. I have healthy boundaries. I am centered. I magnetize. I invite. Communication, listening, expression. I am internally motivated to create. I express my needs with ease. I am open to change. I possess emotional mastery, language, and intelligence. I understand and express in multiple perspectives, languages, and levels. Intuition. I know the path of least resistance. I possess claircognizance and clairvoyance. The crown, as I've shared before, I am an open channel for divine source to flow through me. Great, so if anyone feels called to share some of their juicy ones, I would love to hear a few, one, any.
Regarding heart, one that I personally really enjoy is I am the lover and the beloved. So just really connecting with that love flows both ways. Mm-hmm.
Another good one, now that you shared that, was is that, you know, we are also the maid, the mother, and the crone. So there's this idea that As the mother, you get to be the maid asking the questions, and you get to be the crone in answering your own questions. Okay, does anyone have any questions or reflection? Love to hear any reflection on things that they already do or a new piece of knowledge they might have learned.
I'm a little bit more curious about your embodying with actions. So would you use these even if you were like triggered in conversation with somebody, or say you're in a social setting? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started even working with this, I went to the bathroom all the time. Like I think there's a place we can try to find where it can be a little safer, especially when you're just starting to understand when you're even being triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it would be good, even if you don't get into those situations, that when you step into a place, to kind of keep some semblance of, okay, if I really need to, I'll go to the bathroom and I'm going to do this work, right? And I've definitely done that before, where I just go and I let myself just really feel it and then self-soothe. And then nowadays, I feel more comfortable expressing my boundaries by saying, I'm getting really emotional and it's the conversation's not getting productive, so I need to step aside. And some people will understand. I mean, most people, I think, when you say that to them, they will let you go. Um, and I think that what happens as you continue to practice this is that the reactivity starts um, getting after the awareness. So, what I've noticed in my own practice is I start to notice when I'm about to get triggered, or I start to notice when I am getting into that reactivity mode. And then I'm able to be present with myself and just like feel it in my body internally instead of getting right through to the spiral immediately, right? Or there's spaces, right, in which you can say, I'm not ready to do this right now. Can we have this conversation at a later time? But let's say there's a social gathering and you weren't expecting it to happen, then I would go to a safe space and I would go into like I don't, here's the boundaries, right? And what happens when you start practicing this at home, when you practice like saying no, when you have like these cues for yourself, then you don't have to wait until the situation happens for you to feel through them. So I practice like almost like triggering myself a little bit. I don't go the full amount every time. Like sometimes I am triggered when I'm by myself, so I don't have a choice. But sometimes I just practice like, what does it feel like to feel longing? And then I get really, really sad, right? And I start crying. And then I start feeling like what does it feel like to clear that energy? And to really clear that. And then what's on the other side? What comes up? And so I'm not waiting for the feeling of longing to just come whenever, right? Or I'm not waiting for a situation in which someone has control over my emotions, because I'm allowing myself in this safe space in my own home to feel it and to act it out and to bring it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've noticed a difference when I started doing that, I think a lot of times too, there's this idea that we don't live in very much like actual fear, as privileged people, right? Um, that we're not constantly fearing for our lives. So a lot of times we invoke that feeling even when it's not necessary. So it's almost like giving yourself a little poison or like a little um, medicine, right? A little bit of poison, a little bit of medicine, but in terms of emotions, like, hey, I haven't allowed myself to feel this way. I'm not going to wait for myself to be triggered by that. Let's just feel it now. And so you can set a time, a space like this hour, I'm going to move and I'm going to act out some emotions. And sometimes it can be planned, or sometimes it could just come out without you realizing it. Like I know so many times where I was like, wow, I was actually really emotional today. And I didn't know that because I'm so used to just suppressing it. It's just in my subconscious, right? Or it can be very intentional. Like today, I'm going to practice my no's. I'm going to practice how to say no, and I bring the person in the room, and I literally act out how I would like say no to this person. This it might be like more aggressive for this, or it might be more like grounded. Um, and then also a really good practice in at all times when you're doing this is like you can practice reaching out and really like, oh, I'm longing, but then also notice like how can you feel longing while still this feeling this centeredness in your heart. So you can start practicing like what is a healthy way to feel anger. How can I still like center myself but really feel into my anger? And how can I feel sadness without really like completely self-destructing everything? So there is a way to do it. We just don't learn in a lot of ways to access these emotions in a healthy way. So then it just pops out, or it happens in a social situation. So this is kind of like our way to be caring for ourselves and to have integrity, and to really have the energy to show up for other people. Yeah, thanks for asking that. And I don't teach or I haven't taught a lot on embodiment, specifically on that um, that fluidity. But there's definitely methods to really get clear on that, and we can talk about that more if you want. If you're like, I want to know more, and how do I actually like understand my body, and how, what does it mean to be centered? What does it mean to be more feminine in my body, and what does it mean to be more masculine in my body? Um, so so there's ways to also like very clearly define that in our practice of embodiment as well.
I like the way you describe it, because by holding that container for ourselves to experience it, because you were going back and forth between like poison and medicine, I thought it's like the emotional vaccine, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Emotional vaccine today.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then I mean, and when you take a vaccine, you feel a little bit sick at first, right? And so, I mean, there's so many cultures out there that they believe feeling some nausea is good, or they believe that purging is good. And I think a lot of this Western culture is based off of, oh, this isn't desirable, so we're not going to feel it at all. Well, in reality, we are going to, and we are going to feel sick. So, um, might as well like interact with it in a healthy way. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say.
Um, I actually have a question. I know we're close to wrapping up in the time, but so like what I find so interesting about like this particular practice is like there is a soloness to it, right? Because we're writing down our intentions, our desires, and so on. But then, like, the space between the soloness and then the interconnectedness, right? Because it's like, even as we were like moving through the chakra system, like that's interacting like outside of ourselves, even though intention setting starts with us, like on our own in a way. And so I was wondering about what is your take on maybe the relationship between like intention setting and then like the expansion into manifestation, because part of manifestation is also about us interacting with the world around us, right? So I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, yeah. Your question kind of brought up something as well. When I'm manifesting, I do not try to change what someone else's thoughts and feelings are. So sometimes we might get into a feeling of, um, I want this person to love me, right? But that's not the way we want to go about it. I love how Kim, who taught me a lot of this, she described it as kind of black magic, right? That's manipulation. That's changing someone's mind. So that's where I kind of go with like that's why we start with the internal, because it's everything is internal, even if it's external. We process it here and then we perceive. So I think what happens with the external when we start interacting with other people in this is that you just start to notice what it is that you need, and you start noticing these are the people that will also help me in achieving what I want to for the universe, right? And it could be very simple, or it could be literally like changing the world. Um, so I think that just happens in due time, especially if we tune into that magnetizing quality. So we become the person that we want to be. And then when that person sees, oh, this is what I'm also into, or this is who I want to be, then they will be able to seek you out. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I like that your answer included about the influence on people. And I guess I left my question like a pretty general scope. So like also in terms of like interconnectedness and like interacting with the environment around us. Like for example, like when that when you spotted like the hookah tube, is that right?
But yeah, the hose.
Yeah, the hose, yeah. So that reminds me of just kind of like that's like an environmental layer that does become interconnectedness and it's like becoming outside of us, right?
Right.
So that was the other side of the scope I was also curious about.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. So that comes down to what we talked about with the actionable steps. So I wasn't looking for a hookah, but it still happened anyway because I go out, you know, and I explore things. So obviously, we're not gonna manifest, but then like do nothing about it. Hopefully,
That makes sense.
so we start like going out to the world. But I don't think that we necessarily have to like push so hard to say um, I need to put myself out there now because I wrote up down all these intentions. It's that you know your life will just start kind of transforming when you start transforming what's happening inwardly. Um, and that being said, it is really helpful to write down also like the steps you need to take if you want to have more money in your life. You have to come up with like what is it, right? What's going to make that happen? What do I have to do? And the key here is now hopefully you would have the motivation to begin that work. Um, and it doesn't happen overnight. Um, and you really truly have to believe in this work. And in the end, I think doing that work will transform whatever happens externally, even if you're not doing anything different technically in like what spaces you enter. But I think that it is helpful to be really open to the places you enter. Um, in general, in my life, I can only speak for myself. When I step into a space, even if it's uncomfortable, I learn something from it. And so that's the openness to receiving and to maybe even interact with someone that you don't normally interact with and seeing well what happens there and getting really curious. um, Curiosity really is key here.
I like how we ended up both addressing about like interacting with other people and then interacting with like environment. And so like the similarities that I hear between them is also like it is also like interaction and a relationship and something that goes back and forth. And so it does make me think like with a person when we're having a dialogue, we don't dominate, you know, talking. Like we have to give space to listening too. So when you were just talking about like really pushing with manifestation, it just reminds me of the person who is like on the one-sided soapbox in the room and that the other person doesn't really have a chance to take it in or to respond. And so just hearing about interacting with manifestation, whether it comes to like others as people or the world around us, that because it is that give and take, that they also need to have space. And that sometimes that's where I think you, as you said, like the magnetizing comes in and allowing ourselves to receive and like action like to a point, right? But then also allowing that action to have effect, to see the impact, and then we continue, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
so I kind of like how those two tied together. And then I agree with you about respecting other people's autonomy. And I feel like um, Michaela's question earlier, some of it was about pertaining to like social interaction and boundaries. And one thing that over time I realized like boundaries, it's like I feel like when we don't hold our boundaries, I feel like it's a weird form of blackmailing ourselves into like repressing that. And then it's like, um, as much as we don't want to disrespect other people's autonomy, it's also important for us to not disrespect our own. And so, like, I connected with what you said about like having safety as our priority, and then what are the ways we can access that in all situations, whether it's like having a place to go to, having a place to step away, to reconnect with ourselves, or things in those moments. It's like, how can we take care of ourselves? And when I really think about how we move through the chakra system, I realize that, like, in group situations like that, what is it that's not being established is the safety, right? So then that's the feeling that we want to reconnect with first. And what does that look like for us? What does it mean? What does it take for us to reconnect to our safety in those kind of situations where we may not have as many options, where, so it's like, what can we do in that moment? I feel like.
Right.
So I appreciated the feedback that you shared about that.
Yeah, and sometimes safety can mean actually physically getting to safety, and sometimes safety can mean um, more emotional or energetically. So, yeah, there's definitely no shame in I need to physically remove myself if you need to. Um, that's definitely a form of taking care of yourself. Uh,
So I have a question about that. When you're trying to kind of find your edge of the polarities or where they meet and establish safety for yourself, but you're also like pushing yourself a little bit, how do you make sure that you're not breaking your self-trust
hmm.
or leading to more like self-doubt in the future? I guess it's like, how do you know where the line is? Maybe. Does that mean you have to cross the line to find it? Like,
Right. Do you feel like when you've allowed yourself to feel that you weren't able to return?
occasionally I will spiral and yes, kind of just stay a little bit stuck, and it doesn't last as long as it used to, but I do have that fear sometimes when I do these intentional practices, like, what if I open Pandora's box?
Right. So I would really tune into what are those fears? Like if what would happen? Like you don't have to put yourself there first. You can kind of use your analyzing first to think about what will happen if I really went down the spiral in the rabbit hole. What is that actual fear stemming from? And I think when we start to really be able to name what those fears are, they start unraveling a bit. But what happens is it sounds like there's a fear of the unknown. Like I don't know what's going to happen if I really get to this rabbit hole. Well, what happens if you know what the fear is exactly? And most of the time, those fears are very those basic survival instincts of I fear dying, and I fear that I wouldn't be able to support myself. If I did this mental break, if I like really allowed myself to break down emotionally, um, then I can't take care of myself anymore. And then what happens? And then um, I'm gonna so and so and so and so, and then then you think about like, am I actually going to die from this, right? Um, and it might not be just death, but you don't know what the core, the very root of that fear is until you ask yourself, and then what? So there's, you know, something I learned, especially with performance anxiety, is you ask yourself, like, why do I feel nervous? And, well, I fear that I'm going to be judged. And then what? If I'm judged, then my reputation will be, you know, will be ruined. And then what? You know, um, so if I really went down the rabbit hole with that, is just this fear of judgment. Um, so so I would really try to get clear with yourself, like maybe as a writing exercise, and then what? If I allowed myself to feel this way, and then what? What is it really? And to really get to the root of the situation and the root of the fear. Again, you don't have to bring yourself there to really start analyzing that. And and then maybe you just work through the layers instead of getting all the way. If you feel yourself kind of teetering, that point where you feel like you can't come back, then you start bringing some practices to clear the energy. To what can you do to physically like clear this feeling, right? Um, but the more you don't allow yourself to examine those emotions, the more that they will continue to express themselves when you don't have a choice in when. So the way I think about it is, I can either choose to feel this way now with autonomy, or I can let that spiral happen whenever it wants to. Um, the truth is, it will happen anyway. And I think there's something to be said that you're not feeling those spirals as long anymore. And I think that there's something to be said about like knowing yourself that you have bounced back before, right? And that those, it's not failure. It's not failure that you have spiraled all the way and were not able to be productive for weeks. That is part of the process of learning. And so I think that there's a piece there of understanding that what has happened where you did break down were not failures. It's not a thing that has to be fixed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I want to also touch on what Sarah said for a second, in terms of like the internal and the external. Um, like the polarities between independence, and codependence is interdependence. So maybe for you, in order not to be really taken over by the triggering, is to really like figure out the words, to figure out like, what are those things that I'm really afraid to feel. Write those down, and then find first, like, what would that feeling of integration be? And maybe if you felt like knew what that integration is through the mind first, then you can work with the body. instead of allowing the body to just come out, if that feels scary for you. Um, and again, I think that there's also something to be said about having someone hold space for you while you do this, and understanding like maybe self-soothing wouldn't be enough. So if you do this work, can you have someone there to soothe you? So understanding like the safety aspect of it and trusting that you can get yourself back to feeling safe. um, there is definitely a trust there that you ultimately will not die from feeling.
Right, yeah.
Right. Is there anything else that comes to mind? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michaela and Sarah, for stepping in to be open to receiving,
Yeah, thank you.
to
Thank
ask.
you so much, April.
Yeah. So, um, let's see if you want to share, if you have any more questions in the coming days, you can totally ask me. If you're watching the replay, you can also feel free to ask me any questions. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely night and rest well.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.